My name is Monica Rosenberg. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Chicago, and I'm excited to tell you about my lab's work characterizing attention dynamics with brain state dynamics. As we navigate our daily lives, and especially as we watch recorded talks online, we can appreciate that our attentional state is constantly changing. Sometimes we might be really engaged and focused on what we're doing, whereas at other times we might mind wander or get distracted, or sort of zone out from a task at hand. I want to argue today that when we're studying sustained attention, we're trying to understand the neural basis of these fluctuations in attention over time and differences in the overall ability to maintain focus across people. This new approach of precision neuroimaging or deep imaging is really critical. So in addition to working with data sets where we have data collected from many, many people, it's important, and we can learn unique information from collecting a lot of data from a smaller number of individuals. And so I want to make two arguments, like two different ways to do this. So first, I'll argue that collecting a significant amount of high quality data from well-validated attention tasks allows us to build generalizable models of individual differences in sustained attention function, as well as characterize changes in attentional state over time. So because our attention fluctuates naturally, we have to collect enough data to allow people's attentional states to cycle through all different possibilities in order to measure them. I also want to argue that complementing studies that maximize the amount of really well-characterized attention task data that they collect, sampling functional MRI data across many cognitive contexts or different kinds of tasks allows us to learn unique information. In particular, it allows us to assess the replicability of brain behavior associations across these different contexts, as well as discover context general and context specific associations, right? So whether there are patterns of brain activity or functional connectivity related to attention similarly or differently in different kinds of cognitive or task states. So first, I want to show some evidence that collecting a lot of attention task data on a relatively small number of people sets us up to build generalizable models of attention function. So in this study, we had 25 healthy young adults perform this continuous performance task in the scanner. They were instructed to press a button to every city scene and to withhold button press to every mountain scene. So you just saw the example for about 10 seconds, but participants in this study did the task for about 40 minutes in the scanner. And so the goal of this study was to use each person's task-based functional connectivity pattern to predict their overall performance score on the task. Here we measure performance with D prime or sensitivity, which is a measure of the hit rate to those city scenes relative to false alarm rate to the mountains. We used a leave one subject out cross-validation approach and a prediction pipeline known as connectome-based predictive modeling, which you can find on GitHub, to predict individual differences in performance. This revealed two networks that predict performance. So in orange is a high attention network that's stronger in individuals who performed better on the task, whereas in blue, there's a low attention network, which is stronger in individuals who performed poorly. Now, we know from a lot of important recent work that leave one subject out cross-validation and working with small homogeneous samples leads to overfit models and inflated estimates of predictive power. And so we've really focused on asking how this network generalizes to other participant populations and independent data sets to really test the validity of this model. So in several studies since then, I'm just going to tell you about one. We've looked at the strength of these networks in independent data sets and asked whether it scales with sustained attention performance. So in this recent paper led by Omid Kardan, a former postdoc in the lab, we asked how this model, the sustained attention connectome-based predictive model, when applied to data from the ABCD study and the Human Connectome Project, predicted individual differences in zero-back task accuracy. The zero-back task assesses sustained attention as well as other processes like inhibitory control and working memory. And we found that in both of these data sets, this model successfully predicted zero-back task accuracy. So you can see a couple of things from this graph. So in both data sets, right, the networks are predicting performance in the direction we would expect. And then interestingly, you can see that the network is stronger in adults in the Human Connectome Project data set versus 9 to 10-year-olds in the ABCD study data set. And so, it's relatively surprising that a model based on data from only 25 young adults is able to generalize successfully to these independent data sets. And what I really think is key here is the fact that the model was trained on, 40 minutes of high quality attention task data from a very well-validated sustained attention task, giving us reliable brain measures and behavioral scores as well. Now, I'm not the first person to make this argument. Lots of previous work has suggested that task data gives better predictions of individual differences in behavior and phenotypes relative to resting state data. So collecting a lot of attention task data from a small number of individuals allows us to build generalizable models of attention function. And it also gives us the opportunity to characterize changes in attentional state over time. One way we asked this question was by looking at a very unique deep imaging data set. In this data set, one participant was scanned 30 times over the course of 11 months and performed that continuous performance task with cities and mountains that I showed you earlier in each scan session. And so again, we apply this exact same sustained attention network model to data from each session from this participant's data separately. And we found that the model was sensitive to session changes in task performance. So when, on days on which the participant performed better, the model also gave a higher prediction of sustained attention function. And so this is letting us know that the model is sensitive to these week-to-week changes in attentional state, something we would have had no way of knowing without collecting a lot of data from this one person. We can appreciate that our attention also fluctuates on much higher timescales, right? Not just from one week to the next, but even from one moment to the next. You might appreciate this as you're listening to a talk, for example. We can characterize these moment-to-moment fluctuations in attention in our continuous performance task by looking at people's button presses. So prior work has shown evidence that when people are performing well on the task, they're attentive, they're engaged, they respond relatively consistently. But when they're disengaged, they respond more erratically, so either much too fast or too slow. And we can ask how this continuous measure of fluctuating attentional state, which we call the variance time course, which measures response time variability, tracks fluctuation of individual edges in the brain using this measure of co-fluctuation introduced in the literature a couple of years ago. This approach, if you want to learn more about it, please check out a poster from collaborator Henry Jones on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon. This approach has revealed that edges in the brain consistently track fluctuations in attention at this very high frequency time scale. And these same edges also overlap with the sustained attention networks identified previously. So I've shown you that collecting attention task data is great for building models of individual differences in attention and capturing changes in attention over different timescales. But I want to shift to talk about a different kind of approach to personalized imaging or deep imaging, which is not maximizing the amount of data we have on one well-characterized task, but instead collecting data from individual people across many different task contexts. The reason this is important for attention, I think, is one we can appreciate by introspecting on our own experience. So imagine what it feels like to be on the edge of your seat in a suspenseful basketball game, or sort of relaxing and appreciating nature during a hike. Those kinds of attention feel phenomenologically different to us. And so in this study, we asked whether changes in brain state dynamics are related to attentional state dynamics in the same way or in different ways across these different kinds of contexts. So in this study, 27 participants participated in 2 fMRI sessions in which they did 10-minute resting state runs, 2 8-minute continuous performance task runs. They also watched 2 episodes of a popular comedy sitcom, and then watched a subjectively disengaging documentary about the history and geography of Korean rivers. We asked how attentional state dynamics in these contexts are related to brain state dynamics. Recent work suggests that brain dynamics are low dimensional, such that brain activity and covariance changes between a small number of brain states. So we characterize brain state dynamics in our dataset using a hidden Markov model, which revealed 4 states that reliably reappeared across task conditions and datasets. This state includes the default mode network state, the dorsal attention network state, the somatosensory motor state, and the base state. Now, these states are characterized by activation patterns and covariance patterns shown in those matrices. And I want to emphasize that they're not defined only by the networks that they are named for. Those are simply useful ways to refer to them, but instead they're importantly defined by patterns of both activation and deactivation and covariance. So how do people cycle between these brain states during our task conditions? During rest, we can see that people seemed random, right? There's no synchrony across individuals in terms of their entering and exiting certain brain states. Similarly, during that continuous performance task. But during the sitcom episode, we start to see synchrony between participants, such that there are moments of time when everybody is in the dorsal attention network state or the base state, for example. During the documentary, we see some synchrony, although sort of visually not quite as much. So the key question here is, how do these brain state dynamics relate to people's attentional dynamics during these fMRI runs? We can ask that by looking at attention task performance when people are in each of these 4 states. So in our first continuous performance task run, we see that people are significantly showing better attention, so more stable response times, when they're in that default mode network state. This pattern of results is replicated in our second task run, as well as in data from a completely independent data set collected several years ago. And so this tells us that the DMN state is consistently reflecting high attentional engagement during this controlled task. And that might seem counterintuitive, but it's actually been reported in several prior publications. So what about during those movies? What about during this sitcom? To measure attention in these runs, we had people rewatch the sitcom episodes after MRI and indicate at every moment of time how engaged they were in the episode. And so here we're just asking, how engaging did people report different parts of the movie to be? Here we see a different pattern of results than the task data. So during the base state, that's when the movie tends to be more engaging. Now, this pattern of results is replicated in the second sitcom episode, as well as data, again, collected by an independent group using a different movie stimulus. So interestingly, it looks like this base state reflects high attentional engagement during narratives. If we think of the opposite side of the spectrum, so attention lapses, we can see that pretty consistently across these run types and data sets, the somatosensory motor state is more active when people are experiencing an attention lapse. So collecting data from these different task contexts allowed us to discover that the DMN state and the base state are context-specific signatures of engaged attention, whereas the SM state is a context general signature of lapsing attention. So if you're watching this before the Gradients of Brain Organization workshop, I highly encourage you to check it out on Friday, July 21st. Ha-Young Song, the first author of this paper, will be presenting and sharing a lot more about this project. So just to wrap up, I've argued that functional brain connectivity predicts individual differences in sustained attention across data sets, that the same functional connections predict week to week and moment to moment attention changes within individuals, and that low dimensional brain states reflect fluctuating attention similarly and distinctly in controlled and naturalistic task contexts. So with that, I just want to thank you for your attention and thank my lab, my collaborators, and my funding sources, and also encourage you to check out these presentations from my lab and collaborators if you have the opportunity to do so.